The Transgender Issue by Shon Faye is, as the subheading says, an argument for justice. Shon Faye is a pretty prominent British journalist and writer. She is a trans woman. She is an advocate for trans rights. The Transgender Issue is a nonfiction which deals with the state of being trans in the UK right now. It discusses transphobia, and it discusses all of the legal, social, political, medical, and educational problems and hurdles and issues that trans people today in the UK face on a daily basis. Before we get started, I do want to echo something that Shon Faye herself says right at the beginning of the book, which is that the transgender issue isn't really written for trans and non-binary people. And it's also not really written for transphobic, gender-critical, TERFy people either. Those people are not going to have their minds changed because it's very difficult to weed out bigotry. Snowy was summoned by the word TERF, and she's going to bite him. She can't, she has no teeth. Alright, stay there. So this book is not for trans people, and it's not for bigots either. It's for the average British person. The average working or middle class, white, Tory voting, tax-paying, countryside living British human being. You think about the average British person who gets their news from the BBC and, if they're less lucky, something like the Daily Mail. The media frames trans people in a certain light. The media has been, over the last few years, increasingly and dangerously transphobic. It does not platform trans people in the debate around trans lives and trans rights. So often, media platforms give space to non-trans people to discuss the very existence, the lives and the rights of trans people. And so, shush Snowy, the transgender issue kind of exists as a platform for a trans person who is a journalist and a fantastic writer to provide a counter-argument to some of the awful bigotry and lies and general dangerous nastiness that is increasingly filling up the British media space and public social space as well. Reviewing non-fiction can be quite difficult because it's so easy to just parrot all of your favourite parts of a non-fiction as examples of why you think it's good. So I'm going to try and avoid doing that. Snowy, I swear to God. Oh my God, I love this cat to pieces, but she is a problem. The way that the transgender issue is framed is that it has a series of chapters, I think there are 7, and each chapter focuses on a specific social, political, legal, or medical issue. These issues, of course, are focused on trans people. The lack of medical rights, the lack of legal rights, the statistics involving things like homelessness and addiction and bullying and bias within many, many different institutions, work, school, hospitals, the home, etc. But what makes this such an interesting book is, again, its subheading, an argument for justice, because it doesn't say trans justice. It doesn't say justice for non-cisgender people. It doesn't say queer justice. It just says justice. And that's what makes this book stand out, and it's really good at encouraging empathy from the average person who is not transgender. It is an argument for justice in general. Every single argument, every single point that Shon Faye brings up, every single bit of evidence, every interview, everything that she has put into this book is an argument for justice for everybody. When she discusses things like police brutality, she is not just discussing the statistical likelihood of trans people being abused by the police more than cis people. She's talking about police brutality being an issue across the board. If trans people are being abused by the police, so are women, so are black people, so are other minorities, so are all of us. It's an argument that if we improve police brutality towards trans people, we improve the statistics of police brutality and make the state a safer place. And the same goes for things like homelessness. She discusses a lot of the statistics and the stories and the narratives and the examples of trans people being homeless. A statistic that stuck in my head is that a quarter of teenagers who become homeless in the UK are queer. and the majority of those have been kicked out of their home by parents who are homophobic, transphobic, etc. So this is an argument for the justice of queer trans people, but it's also an argument against homelessness and against how politicians, the government, the state, etc. creates homelessness as a problem. So yes, this is a socialist book, and as a non-cisgender socialist, this was right up my alley. But again, I am not the target demographic here. The target demographic is the average person who gets all of their information from the media and doesn't really think critically about, oh my god, Snowy, the state of homelessness and trans lives and police brutality, etc., in this country. This cat is destroying my video. It's okay, I love you. The first chapter of this book begins with the story of a girl called Alex, and Shon Faye makes it clear that all of the names are actually changed to protect the identities and the safety of the people that she interviews. Alex is a girl who's around the age of 12, she's just joined high school, and she is a transgender girl who was raised by two parents who didn't know anything about what a trans person actually was when their daughter, around the age of 3, came out as trans and insisted on being called a girl. And so her parents, luckily for her, did their research. They listened to her, they talked to people, and they accepted her gradually for what she was. And surprisingly to no one, I hope, this allowed Alex to flourish as a young girl. It made her life good and safe. She had a family that loved her and accepted her and tried their best to challenge any bullying and bigotry that might come their daughter's way. And then the chapter goes into the fact that Alex is one of the lucky few, and a lot of transgender children and teenagers are not so lucky. And while she's there, Shon Faye also talks about the misconception of trans teenagers having top and bottom surgery before they are 18, before they enter adulthood. This is a very common misconception that is peddled by the media and by general transphobes and bigots, the idea that children under the age of 18 are going under the knife, and it's not true, and Shon Faye proves it. She does this time and time again. A lot of the book is full of examples of misinformation, bigotry, transphobia, etc. that is rife within social media and the media in general, and she just pulls it all apart and shows how it's not true and gives us actual information. She is encouraging us to not only sympathize and empathize with the lives and the experiences of trans people of all ages across the UK and beyond, she's also asking us to listen and do research and consider the statistics and be more informed and more considered and considerate. That involves a little bit of reading, that involves a little bit of time, but it's a good thing. I also have to say, when I first heard about this book, when Shon Faye first revealed the transgender issue, I wasn't so sure about the title. And I saw on Instagram she said that her editor wasn't sold on the title either, until he realized that she was in fact right. And I get it now. At first I thought a trans woman writer producing a book about justice and calling it The Transgender Issue felt like it was playing devil's advocate against trans people and trans rights, but that's not the point. I actually think this is a great marketing tool for attracting people whose only understanding of trans people is the issue. And it's so often called that. Newspapers, TV media, the internet, social media, they all dress up trans people as though they are an issue, not human. Trans people are people. Non-binary people like myself are people. We are not statistics. We are not pawns for the media. So much of the transgender issue is just a repeat of the gay issue from the 1980s and 1990s, and even still today. So many of the arguments that bigots and transphobes make against trans people are the same arguments that homophobes have been making for decades. They're just regurgitated and repeated again and again. And so she is constantly pulling apart transphobia, and I think by titling it The Transgender Issue, she is pulling in people, you know, the average person that goes into Smith's or Waterstones or Tesco even and sees this book on the shelves is going to go, I've heard about the transgender issue. What is this all about? I'll pick up this book and I'll be actually informed by a trans person who has lived experiences and has interviewed people and done her research and been informed and is trying to set the record straight. So I've only really talked about chapter 1, and it would be very easy for me, as I said, to just parrot every single chapter. But this book goes into several different avenues of trans lives and trans experiences. The cat just went out the window and then came in through the door. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, as I said at the beginning, we've got police brutality and state violence, mostly in the UK, but you can extrapolate it to many other countries, the US especially. You've got medical bias and the hurdles that trans people have to go through in order to be formally, medically, legally recognized as trans, start hormone replacement therapy, potentially get surgery if that is what they want to do. And Shon Faye, by the way, also helps to educate people on what trans means, the difference between medical transition and social transition. Being trans is a spectrum, and it does include non-binary people. And she's really good at recognizing that. She also says at the beginning that this book might use some terms that will eventually be out of date because language evolves and grows and changes, and the way we interact with language and legality as well always changes. And so she's savvy in that way. I mean, she's incredibly savvy. She's a wonderful writer and a very intelligent human being. But you'll find almost every issue that faces trans people and permits trans people to live their lives is present here. She goes into homelessness, as I said, bullying at school, domestic violence, police brutality, medical bias from doctors who ignore or don't believe trans people, and all of this is backed up by statistics, examples, interviews. It's very, very well researched, and occasionally Shon Faye brings in some of her own personal examples, but she does make it clear at the beginning that this is not her story. This is the story of trans people in general. Here, Shon Faye is being a journalist. So many trans people write excellent books that are primarily memoirs, and I've read a lot of them, and I really love them, and they're fantastic, and they do encourage empathy, and they do encourage us to listen to their story. But this isn't what Shon Faye is doing here. This is not a memoir. There are a few personal examples that she gives when they are relevant, but for the most part, this is a journalist writing a fantastic piece of nonfiction that is about trans lives and trans rights, socialism, social change, legal change, medical change, encouraging and improving the lives of everybody by improving the lives of trans people. If you improve the medical rights of trans people, you are improving the medical rights of everybody in Britain. The same for state rights, police brutality, etc. These things I've already said. This is an argument for justice for everyone. When we stop people in their tracks from trying to improve their lives, whoever they are, whatever group they belong to, we are stopping progress in general. And that is Shon Faye's argument here, and it is a fantastic argument. This is a necessary book, especially for anyone who knows what trans people are, doesn't really have an opinion, perhaps has been told by their favourite newspaper or people on Facebook that trans people are dangerous and they want to do X, Y, and Z dangerous things, when in actual fact they are just people who are more vulnerable to things like bullying, police brutality, state violence, legal bias, suicide, etc. People who just want to live their lives. And it gives examples of how they are not able to do that and why that's not fair and how they should be able to. Meanwhile, we're also being shown how the general social and legal and medical aspects of British life could also improve. The Transgender Issue is a fantastic book. It is a wonderful piece of nonfiction. It might be my favourite piece of nonfiction that has come out this year. Of course, I am biased. I spend all day, every day thinking about trans rights and trans lives. I am a non-binary person, and this is very near and dear to my heart. But it's still an important book for anyone who cares about social justice and improving the lives of people in general. Please pick it up and subscribe for books.